Right. Good. Good morning, afternoon, or evening, depending on where you're joining us from today. Thank you so much for making time to be part of this discussion on how stakeholders can leverage common interests to advance responsible and ethical artificial intelligence. We really look forward to your active participation in this session. Now, while AI has demonstrated great potential in solving problems in many domains, such as health, media, entertainment, human capital management, among others, concerns remain on the potential harms such as bias, discrimination, invasion into privacy, and denial of individual rights, among other issues. Out of 200 of the world's most influential digital technology companies assessed by the World Benchmarking Alliance's digital inclusion benchmark recently, only 44 out of the 200 reported using a publicly available framework for ethical AI. While there was a slight improvement on the companies, thanks to engagements and awareness creation efforts by stakeholders in our collective impact coalition for digital inclusion, the lack of voluntary adoption of these principles by a majority ultimately points to the need for multi-stakeholder collaborations to create awareness around these issues and drive systemic change. Today, we are pleased to be joined by distinguished lead discussants from different sectors of the digital space who will lead the discussion on this important topic. We'll also have a 20-minute Q&A session during which you're welcome to engage by using the Zoom raise hand function and share your thoughts in the chats as well. Just a reminder that this event is being recorded and will be shared on social media, but please feel free to engage with us during the discussion part. First of all, I would like to welcome Jan Rizak, who is the lead digital sector transformation at the World Benchmarking Alliance, to make his opening remarks on this topic. Jan, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Nicholas. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. Many thanks to all of you who are here with us today. As Nicholas mentioned, I'm WBA's Digital Sector Transformation Lead, fresh off a long tour of duty at Ranking Digital Rights, which is a fellow benchmarking initiative focusing on technology companies. I do see many familiar faces in the room, so I know at least some of you have heard of it or are familiar with it. So I won't dwell on that. So just a few words to start us off on this discussion. Ethical AI principles are the starting point. I think we all are fairly agreed on that. Today automated systems are ubiquitous. They form the backbone of the internet's basic structures. They have an endless array of uses, and they can have very tangible effects for the users of specific products that companies put out. They're baked into the invisible bidding war for ad space that takes place every single time that you open a browser window or a website. They determine the content that you see in your social media feed, often optimizing for engagement, for virality. And increasingly, we're seeing that they are the stewards of how content is moderated and restricted online. So in short, there are a lot of value judgments here. In most cases, because of the invisibility of AI, users are barely aware of the scale of the use of AI in their sort of everyday life, if at all they are aware, of course. One example, 2 years ago, Microsoft acquired an AI-powered content moderation platform with the explicit purpose of improving the community of users of Xbox, which many of you will know is Microsoft's flagship gaming brand. And in the following quarter, the number of actions that were taken against users who were thought to have violated the rules on Xbox increased tenfold, according to Xbox's own transparency report. That's not inherently a good thing or a bad thing. It would require a lot of additional analysis and a lot of contextualization, but it is emblematic of how big a difference, I would say, a single AI tool can make. And it should also prompt greater transparency among tech companies in general. And this pattern of invisibility is not, this is not the only example of it. There are other invisibilities that are associated with the use of AI tools and the development of AI tools. There's the human labor that goes into training many AI systems that are operating today, labor that is often difficult, grueling, unrecognized, and potentially exploitative. we also rarely get a sense of how the benefits and the impacts of AI are distributed across individual communities, individual societies that form each company's ecosystem. And of course, I believe at least part of you are here because AI is top of mind for a lot of us. It's in the news everywhere. It's in every headline that you can see. And of course, that is because in part of the advent of generative AI, which makes these challenges even more chaotic, even more complicated to assess. So I think there could be no better time for this initiative. But because of the complexity of these challenges, that is why this first year of the Collective Impact Coalition is actually just a prelude, and we're already writing the next chapters, so to speak. And that means finding ways to integrate the 50 companies that made their debut in the Digital Inclusion Benchmark this year. It means expanding on how they should be demonstrating their AI principles at work beyond simply sort of articulating the principles. And it also means collaborating with other benchmarks, with other communities to bring this initiative to new heights. So that is all from me. Thank you all again for being here. And with that, I will pass it back to Nicholas to introduce our distinguished speakers and kickstart the discussion. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Jan. Very important points there on, collaboration. AI affects all of us. Therefore, the way forward, how can we work together as stakeholders to make it more responsible that benefits everyone without negatively impacting people in society. Now, I'm pleased to welcome our lead discussants to share their insights on this topic as well. We are delighted to be joined by Lauren Compere, the Managing Director and Head of Share Owner Engagement at Boston Common Asset Management, a co-host of this event, as well as a co-lead for the investors in the Collective Impact Coalition for Digital Inclusion. We're also joined by Caitlin Kraft Bookman, the CEO and founder, Women at the Table, also a co-host of this event, and the lead civil society for the Collective Impact Coalition for Digital Inclusion. We're also joined by Jean-Christophe Pazaglia, an AI ethics expert at SAP. And finally, we are joined by Shamira Ahmed, the Executive Director at Data Economy Policy Hub. I'll start with you, Lauren. As a participant of the Digital Kick, what are your comments on the Digital Inclusion Benchmark findings on ethical AI, and why do you think this topic is important to investors? And finally, what actions are investors in the Digital Kick taking to ensure responsible AI? You have about 4.5 minutes to take on this.
I'll try. I actually wanted to start with the why, which I think is actually really, really critical. I wanted to pick up on something Jan said. Technology is neither inherently good or bad, but how it's used. We think actually technology used without proper governance, ethics, human rights, causes real harm and consequences, and we've seen that, and some others will allude to some of those specifics. I think as investors, we need to look at the ecosystem where AI is used. Not only do we need to engage the companies we're investing in, but actually also promote and support strong global regulatory systems under which AI and algorithms are used. I think it's really, really disturbing, actually, where we see this proliferation of deep fakes, the widespread global governance, generative AI that Jan talked about, including emergent properties. In some ways, we feel like AI is a little bit like the Wild West. And as investors, I'm not sure we clearly understand what really is happening. And I think only through discussions with companies and the use of sort of KPIs and metrics that the WBA Digital Inclusion has, I think we start to get a sense of how companies themselves are grappling with the unknown qualities of AI. And in particular, I thought it was really telling that Alphabet's CEO in a recent interview, I think it was 60 Minutes, talked about generative AI. And that the field itself is calling it a black box. You don't really fully understand it. You can't quite tell why it said this or that. and why in many cases it might get something wrong. And there are many instances of that. I want to go into the what and the how. In terms of the work that we've been doing with the WBA digital inclusion. I think it was really important, while we only focused on one particular KPI, does the company have an ethical AI set of principles? The conversations themselves went much deeper than that. We are, as a coalition, there's 29 investors, including Fidelity, who's co-leading this, engaging 40 companies over the last 9 months. And while the focus was really on, sort of that one KPI, what goes behind that is much more. I myself have had the pleasure of really digging in and engaging, I think about 9 companies in total, either collaboratively or being the lead, in places like Japan and Korea and China, the US and Europe. And we really focused on 4 key questions. How was the company considering and defining AI in its business and business strategy? How and whether ethical considerations were integrated in the development and deployment of AI? Who's responsible for and how are AI considerations governed within the company? And then obviously the North Star, do you have a public ethical AI set of principles? I think as an investor, AI ethics and governance are key. We've actually been pleased to see many companies moving on, the public adoption of AI principles and oversights. But really, we must have a better understanding of how these are implemented in practice across the technology value chain, from pre-design to R&D, monitoring sales, and the ability, for example, to modify or dual use capacity of AI and algorithm technology. For example, we've had conversations on how engineers are trained and accountable. We've used peer comparison, best practice models, and regulatory impacts as sort of drivers for conversation, especially as we see regulatory drivers increase over time, including in the EU around the corporate sustainability due diligence disclosure. I want to go into some insight that I thought was really telling, though, as part of our conversations, and I'll end on that. One clear insight is that while AI ethics and principles might happen at the group level, where the rubber hits the road really is at individual products, individual subsidiaries, individual R&D teams. And so I think as investors, what we're focused on is not just sort of how AI ethics is governed in principle, but in practice, and how there's ongoing monitoring and due diligence. There should be human rights due diligence and human rights impact assessments done across the value chain and continuously. Human rights due diligence, for example, is not a one and done. It's a continuous process. And as user change, as you might be selling to state actors and situations on the ground in that market change, companies need to be aware that there are risks involved in that and really need to modify. One thing I'll say in terms of the next iteration of engagement with companies is that we are really going to be focusing on the implementation impacts and really understand at the specific product level, how are users informed of the use of AI and algorithms? How are they constantly looking at potentially, how are they mitigating risks? Because we've seen great use of technology and expanding things like access to healthcare and diagnostics and access to financial inclusion, for example. But we can't just say just because there's some good, we don't also address the bad. And I'll stop there.
Thanks a lot, Lauren, for those great insights, really emphasizing on accountability on people and companies, implementation of AI ethics, very important, of course, and we'll explore that further in the discussion part. I'll now bring in Caitlin Kraft Bookman, the CEO and founder at Women at the Table, also the civil society lead for the Collective Impact Coalition for Digital Inclusion. Thank you so much for joining us, Caitlin. a similar question to you. What are your comments on the findings on ethical AI? Only 44 out of 200 companies have AI ethics frameworks. Of course, there's a slight improvement there from the previous iteration. And secondly, what actions can the civil society take to ensure responsible AI that respects people's rights?
Thanks, Nicholas. Thank you. And thank you, colleagues who have just, Jan for the great landscape, and Lauren for the really, really specific and really just fabulously, actually powerful recommendations that you have and the work that you're doing with corporations. I don't really know where to begin. It's of course shameful that so few corporations have been thinking about ethical AI in any way, shape, or form. I have a feeling that this will change very rapidly over the near future, because I think everybody sort of with generative AI, it's been let out of the box, and everybody understands that they don't know what they're dealing with, and also that there's a reputational risk, which is a really, I think, going to be a very powerful thing in terms of helping corporations see the light and moving towards frameworks. I think that we need to have agreed frameworks, and I am a great believer, as those of you who know me, in a human rights-based approach as a point of departure, on top of which we're obviously going to need to be adding all sorts of things like ex-ante impact assessments. We're going to need to have independent audits that have a life cycle approach to the algorithms, because it's not only, of course, the developers who need to understand what they're developing and what the impacts are, but it's also the people that use them at a corporation, or the people who have bought them and then have their employees use them. And of course, people, civil society, all of us are civil society, including corporations, right? That as individuals, what those impacts have. They're particular as we, part of the problem has been that it's only when we have research do we understand really how these things are working, because there's very closed data sets. People have not been able to really understand what is happening inside, but we do know that there are tremendous reiterations and deepening of gender stereotypes and bias, racial stereotypes and bias, and basically everybody that's been excluded from the decision-making systems. Maybe we call them marginalized, but it's basically 90% of the world who's been excluded. It's only really a small subset of guys in the global north that's been included in these decisions. And all the people who've been excluded, those exclusions become explicit in the data. So what we're doing is we're at great velocity, at great scale, inadvertently rewiring all of these discriminations that have existed for decades, centuries, millennia, in many cases. So that's very worrying. It's a moment, though, where we can change the frame. And I think that the one thing that I would like to see us all work on as civil society is to work on the vision of what we want this very powerful technology to do. So obviously we need to be aware of the risk. We need to be aware of its goodness. But what it is if we could collectively focus on what it is that we want to create, which is technology that benefits people, that is technology they need, that's assistive, that's not reductive, throwing people away, but really helping people do their jobs, really helping people be more productive, have better quality of life, sort of to change from looking from harms to benefits, from instead of like leaving no one behind, but bringing everybody along. We have tremendous potential here, but this is the moment for us to do that. And that's actually the reason why I'm quite pleased and proud to be sort of in this company of my wonderful colleagues. So I'll end there and speak more later. Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks, Kathleen. Really focusing on, responsibility in terms of AI development, impact assessment, raising very important points on inclusivity in these conversations as well. And overall, building tech that benefits people, not affecting people negatively. Thank you so much for those rich insights. I'll now bring in Jean-Christophe Pazaglia, an AI ethics expert at SAP, to share with us. So Jean, what approaches are your company taking to ensure responsible and ethical AI? We've heard from, from Lauren on the investor side and Caitlin from the civil society side. And then secondly, what are your comments on the slow adoption of ethical AI principles from the company perspective, as per the digital inclusion benchmark findings, and how can companies then use these findings or these forums and initiatives to to drive efforts around ethical AI? Over to you, Jean.
Thanks, Nicolas. So I think the first question is that sometimes people are wondering why a company like SAP, okay, which we are the first big business software company, but why a company which is basically between doing number crunches should look into that. There are different ways to answer that. So first of all, we want the people to have the final word, to decide about the result that the AI we do on our process, like financial processes and so forth. Second of all, obviously our system are also dealing with people. We are dealing with people in terms of human resource, education, and so forth. And there, it's important that we are looking after what our software are doing from an ethical perspective. And finally, which is sometimes not very taking into consideration, which is the leverage that the company which is equipping a lot of the government and the other companies can have in terms of environmental protection, in terms of let's say fairness in attribution of health insurance and protection scheme and so forth. So all of this, let's say, concern bring us to look into AI ethics very early. And actually, I think in 2018 we were one of the first European company, at least, to have ethical board for AI. So basically, we define some red lines. The first one is a personal freedom. We don't want to do software harming personal freedom. We don't want to do software which can harm, let's say, the society, and by harming not only which is straightforward one, but also we don't want to do software we're unable to manipulate the society. And finally, we don't want to do software which are, let's say, harming the environment. These are basically our red lines. Now we are following what was defined at the EU level in terms of risk case. So basically, we are classifying, let's say, the domain of the AI component that we are developing, and we establish for the more risky, the so-called high risk use case in the EU technology. We are basically providing guidelines to address the main concern. So basically, the process, we define a process that you can look into. And there is a handbook that we recently published that is available for everybody, but that basically try to bring a lot of different stakeholders when you are defining a new software. Then you try to you understand what your software target is, and depending on that, you will go on the classification, and depending on the type of classification, you will have to have more or less, let's say, insurance, or at least to assess your software and how ethical it is. So this is basically the thing. And one other thing which is very peculiar with the type of software that we are doing is that our software are developed for years, not to say decades. So software that will be bring by SAP today is likely to run, probably an updated version, but to run in 10 years or 20 years from now. And not only that, but we also need our software to be used in France, where I'm located, in Johannesburg, or some people are located in Boston, in China, and so forth. So we need to, let's say, capture also this, let's say, AI ethics between localization that we need to do. So basically, this is the big pictures. And basically, we have this ethical advisory board, and we have these guidelines. These guidelines are rolled out to all of our developers, but not only the developers, as it was mentioned before, should let's say take care about that, but the obviously the data privacy protection officer, the business owner, and the machine learning expert, and so forth. So we define on the handbook something like 10 personas that should go toward the 5 steps of our process. So this is basically, let's say, what we are doing, let's say, to have a common way and reproducible way to address AI ethics within all of our software, putting the human centricity in the center of what we are doing. Now, if we are talking about how shy people are about, let's say, implementing AI ethics, I think, first of all, very often people do not realize that what they are doing can be at risk. Like I was saying also before, they don't have, let's say, the training, they don't understand, they get, some data set, they run their algorithm and so forth, but they don't have the training to look into the data set and to check if the data set has inherited from the bias from the society, because at the end of the day, this is what the data set is doing, is inherited the bias from the society, and then the machine learning is reproducing the bias from the society. And this is something that we should fight against that. Second, I think the second aspect is the fact that it is costing time, but first of all, it costs time to think about how to address it. And I think this is where we are in a lot of companies, and especially if you're not looking at the big names, but smaller companies, you really need to do a step backward, look at what you are doing, and try to understand the way you will try to address this concern. The third thing is that until very recently, it's a good wish, and we know what happened with GDPR in Europe. Before GDPR, yeah, people were taking care about privacy, but when they say, okay, you get a fine, they were taking care with more accuracy. That said, there is also something very important to be highlighted, is that as of today, and this is why we did it ourselves for the company, and others company I know are doing also the same. There is not, I would say, a standard process, a standard way to address these concerns across, I would say, the software industry and across all of the domains that the industry providing AI technology for solving issues. So there is not a common process. There are some initiative in the standardization phase. What is asked for by the AI Act is to certify some of the depending if you are in high risk, you should provide certification. But actually, there is very few. It was last year I was leading a panel on standardization for AI ethics, and basically, at least from last year, but I haven't seen real advances on that. There is no real certification agency being able to certify your process, and on top of that, you don't even have the expert to do that because there are very few of them. So it's a very big issue to take into account. It's costing time, it's costing money. But I'm optimistic. I hope it's not because people don't want to do it.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your insights. And I really like that you mentioned bringing different stakeholders to understand software development to ensure fairness and responsibility in the implementation phase, which is very important part of this conversation as well. Finally, I'm delighted to bring in Shamira Ahmed, the Executive Director, Data Economy Policy Hub. Shamira, having heard what the different lead discussants have talked about, inclusivity in development, bringing together different stakeholders, would like to hear your thoughts on, what are some of the opportunities for policymakers to use such findings to influence positive transformation? And also, if you could comment on where we are globally or regionally in terms of AI regulation from policymakers. Over to you, Shamira.
Thanks, Nicholas. My overall comments are first regarding the findings from the benchmarking report is that the digital divide is widening, and there are fewer than 10% of the companies that are assessed that have committed to international standards for ethical practices on AI. And many of the companies that have often use vague text to describe their commitment to cybersecurity, AI ethics, child online safety, and data privacy. And from a policy perspective, these findings are quite problematic, especially for many African countries, which have existing structural economic inequities and including weaker AI maturity and inadequate data governance. So it is quite concerning given that there is quite large differences between those that have the capacity to leverage AI and those that don't. And policymakers in Africa or in most of the low and middle income countries can use the findings of the Digital Inclusion Benchmark report as an evidence base to develop policies that regulate AI in a way that ensures that their rapid digital transformation drives inclusive growth and development, but there needs to be guardrails to ensure that this growth is sustainable and inclusive. And AI ethics comes into light when we're talking about inclusivity and ensuring sustainability. But however, inclusion on AI ethics is a multi-stakeholder approach, like other speakers have mentioned. No single actor can address the complex challenges of digital inclusion and ethics alone, and achieving digital inclusion requires collaboration between governments, the private sector, civil society, and many other stakeholders in the policy and knowledge and implementation ecosystem, as many other discussants have mentioned. So one of the key challenges of creating inclusive AI ethics and governance involves identifying areas where cross-cultural agreements on norms, standards, or regulation, and where different interpretations and approaches are acceptable and even contradictory or desirable, because we live in a heterogeneous modern society with rich cultural diversity. So I think having common language and what we are when defining AI, defining ethics, whose values are being placed when we're creating standards and frameworks to govern global AI. So as other people have mentioned, the multi-stakeholder approach is crucial in creating global norms for AI. And this requires ensuring different stakeholders at the table to address ethical issues involving experts and citizens from the global north and global south, and considering technical and social considerations when designing governance mechanisms. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Shamira. I think one question that I have in terms of, you mentioned difficulties in, bridging cross-cultural boundaries in the definitions of ethics and developing universal frameworks. While Kathleen talked about, their needs, there's a need to, have universal frameworks that guide AI ethics. So perhaps a question that we can leave to the Q&A part, which we're now going to. Then how do we, resolve these, cross-cultural boundaries differences in developing a responsible AI while coming up with universal frameworks. I'll now open the floor for anyone in the audience to share their thoughts on this topic. What are your thoughts on the current state of AI, and how can stakeholders work together to ensure responsibility, especially in the implementation phase? So the floor is open. Feel free to raise your hand through the Zoom function, and I'm happy to bring you in to share your thoughts. Anyone from the audience, feel free to unmute and speak if that works for you. And thanks, Dan, for joining.
Well, while we're waiting, can I just ask a question? I wonder really how cross-cultural it is at the end of the day. If we're saying that we want human-centric design, some of us would call it human rights-based approach, others say human-centric. I mean, we're looking to create technology that is for good, very positive about people making profit from it, but profiting from making things that are helpful. And I think that we probably could all agree on that, and perhaps not focus so much on different cultural points of view, since we have agreed on a lot of principles at the UN and certainly from the Office of the High Commissioner of Human Rights for quite a long time about what our common values are. So anyway, I think that's why I like that as a point of departure instead of thinking about how different we are.
Yeah, thanks, Kathleen. We have someone with their hand raised, Nicolaj from PRI. Sorry, we can't hear you quite well.
Is this better?
Yeah, better. Yeah.
All right, good. Microphone was hiding in the hair. Thank you. Yeah, I was just saying thank you very much, Nicholas, and thank you for the remarks from all the speakers. It's a very interesting topic. I should just caveat my question here with the fact that at the PRI, this is not something we have an established work program on, but we are investigating this as a topic that clearly matters for investors. My question is, so I've seen in the last couple of weeks a number of experts articulating the potential social concerns around AI as an existential issue. I would probably not do it justice if I tried to relate a complicated argument, but I think because of the potential replacement effect in the labor market, but in general in terms of the value of human beings in society. So those are quite some strong remarks that have been made by certain experts. And I've also, as I'm sure most people are aware, seen the call for basically putting a brake on developments because the argument goes that the capacity and the technology is developing so fast that regulation and governance improvements cannot keep up with it. I just wonder whether the panel has any thoughts on both the scale of the risk in terms of an existential risk, but also some of these proposals that are calling for a more radical rethink, like a 6 months break, for example, to really understand what we're dealing with here.
Thanks, Nicolaj, for the great question. Anyone from the panel?
Yeah, actually, Nicholas, I wanted to highlight, we are seeing a proliferation of sort of principles, both from industry and governments themselves. I was able to join, for example, the Democracy Forum in March that the US government hosted, and technology and AI were on the agenda. And so how can we really more, first of all, I don't think many investors even know what these, what's come out of some of these forums. So one, I think there needs to be education on the types of principles-based approaches that are being called, that are being leveraged from governments, to the companies themselves, and how can we move from sort of principles-based to operationalizing those, right? Not only in terms of corporate practice, but in terms of how governments themselves. There's a set of 14 principles called the Declaration of Democratic Principles that governments have endorsed. And at the end, civil society and NGOs came up with their own set of principles, right? So I think we need to understand what civil society is asking for, what governments are already doing, and sort of like look at where the space of where the gaps are, right? To connect those two. And I think that's something the forum could do through education and more robust multi-stakeholder dialogue in the next 12 months.
Thanks, Lauren. June?
Yeah, I wanted to answer with the arm and the stopping and so forth. I think what is important to understand is that we are developing tools. And when people are talking about stopping, they are mainly targeting a very specific set of part of the AI, which is mainly around generative AI and so forth, which is maybe not we are using also, we want to use it and we will use it, but we are also using, let's say, developing tools to address very specific concern and so forth. And for that part, I don't see why we should stop, because I doubt there is a clear risk on this area. Then there is the other part of the area. I doubt that you can declare that everybody stop. So I think that people will still run. So I'm a bit skeptical. But even with that, I mean, we need to understand what we should stop and we should not stop. And I think this is my point. With respect to replacing people, I'd say, once again, it's a tool. When you have new tools, you can do new stuff. And let's hope that, for example, repetitive tasks and so forth will be replaced by more, let's say, interesting tasks and socializing and so forth. Even if now some people can claim that generative AI can also do that, but I think I doubt that it will. First, I doubt it will fly. Second, it's only for me a subset of the type of techniques we are talking about, and for a subset of use case.
Thanks for that. We have Patrick. Feel free to unmute and contribute.
Hello, everyone. Patrick Hiselius at Telia Company, operator based in Stockholm, Sweden. So based on the input from Nicholas here on the challenges, which we have all listened to, and the moratorium and all that, I think, yes, of course, there are challenges, but and high challenges and risks and unknown risks and challenges, but at the same time, there are unknown and high opportunities as well. I'm very convinced that we need to start with the opportunities. We need to start there and then also address the challenges. Otherwise, people will not, start working with the opportunities, and there will be a bias on the discourse and the development work. And then when it comes to those challenges, I think the three core notions here, which are trust, transparency, and rule of law. And so one challenge here is that is rule of law really possible in a black box scenario? And then one more comment to what Jean-Christophe said. I agree. The most important, I'd say, both human rights and ethical starting point is to have a human in control. For me personally, that's the must be the starting point. Thanks.
Thanks, Patrick, for your comments. Indeed, how do we balance opportunities and the risks? I think that is the conversation that we are trying to unpack in this discussion, as well as other forums. Jan?
Thank you, Nicholas. I just wanted to add a few sort of reflections on in response to Nikolai's question. So of course, the dominating discourse, I think, is on the existential risks of AI. But I think it shouldn't be lost on all of us that some of the entities or actors who are part of that discourse are also responsible for developing the tools, right? So in a way, it's creating a circular opportunity and a circular problem at the same time. And I feel like if anything, we might want to think about going beyond, yes, possibly potentially extreme solutions like pausing or stopping the development of these tools, and think more about things like mass testing, right? Because that's a separate pillar. A lot of the generative AI tools that are being developed and being deployed currently are being deployed at the same time as they are being developed, without any specific guardrails or restrictions in terms of who can use them, which is equivalent to informing and feeding the algorithm with additional data without necessarily always being aware of it, right? So I think we do have to introduce that distinction between putting a stop to the development and putting a stop to the testing. Another minor point I just wanted to add is that there are many complicating factors here, right? Besides the black box issue that sort of defines the whole conversation. There is a continuous tug of war in the development of these tools, right? A few years ago, Uber was still developing, tools for automated driving systems, right? Which it then, pursued and then axed, not necessarily because of ethical concerns, but I think it's interesting to look sort of deeper into, the implications of that, right? So in this case, a workforce that was likely to be replaced, but then, then sort of the opposite direction was pursued. So in some ways, you just don't know when the risks will actually hit the individuals who are most concerned and who are most at risk of being replaced. So that among many complicating factors, but I do think that that these are important issues to consider.
Thanks, Jan, for that. I can see a couple of hands raised. Shamira, and I believe Caitlin and Lauren. I'm not sure whether you want to come in again, but Shamira.
Thanks, Nicholas. So I'm going to just go off on a different tangent away from the current discussions about stopping AI and generative AI at the moment. I would just like to highlight that if we're talking about having global transnational frameworks on responsible AI, we definitely need to have a decolonial informed approach, which can help address power imbalances and the distributive impacts of AI, which I don't think comes up in most of the discourse on global AI. Most of the discourse is centered on global North ecosystems, which are very different and in stark contrast to the realities of many countries in the global South. And if we want to encourage legitimacy of global norms, standards, and ethics on international cooperation for AI, then we need to ensure that the expertise, experience, and perspectives of people from the global South are considered in these discussions. And also the diffusion of our ideological values are also included in the technical standards, because for decades it's only been diffusion of technical standards, ideological values, and control to shape institutions and frame global governance from the global North. There's so many literature out there that highlights that oftentimes these are inadequate for global South innovation ecosystems, and so on and so forth. So I think we need to rethink the way global norms, technical standards, and values and institutions are created at the global level.
Thanks, Shamira. Inclusivity definitely an important part of conversations, as well as research development and implementation. We have about 10 minutes to the end of the live session. I can see Caitlin and Lauren, you have your hands raised. Maybe Caitlin.
Yes, there you go. Sorry. I just to go back to the question that we were discussing, although of course I totally agree with you, Shamira, that global standards should include the globe. And in some bizarre way, I think they're great opportunities for the equation of the imbalances to be addressed, because it is one, when we're dealing with member states, which I somehow have a problem with also, that member states without civil society and without all the other actors making these decisions. But if we're going to do it with one member state, one vote, there really is a way for the Global South to have a very, very strong input and impact into whatever global standards are going to be made. And we have this opportunity, of course, with the Global Digital Compact that's coming up. But I wanted to address something a little bit about Patrick's thoughtful questions, comments, statements from Sweden about, let us first address the opportunities and then the challenges, which I think as a general point of view about living life sounds something that I would agree with, but I think that this technology doesn't allow that kind of standard way of operating, because the challenges, which is the bias and the discrimination in the data, going back to these discriminatory impacts that the North, having excluded everyone except for men of the global, white men of the global North, those things are baked into all of the technology that's going to be made, because they're baked into the data sets. And we have to simultaneously address both the issues of the challenges of the fact that this data is really seriously lacking, is reproducing harms, with the opportunities that the technology provides. But we can't like build it, then fix it, because as you all may know, but I will repeat, the Amazon algorithm, the hiring algorithm, just only wanted to just like sort of create something to get in deal with all the resumes they had. They benchmarked against their high performers. They found out that women were being thrown out of the system. They figured out that was because they had benchmarked, their high performers were white males from Stanford who are engineers, also athletes. And then they tried to fix it. And what happened is they couldn't fix the algorithm. So all the engineers, like Humpty Dumpty, all the king's horses, all the king's men, all those engineers could not take the learning out of the machine. The machine, once it had learned that women were not welcome as a rule, because women were not in the system, it couldn't get the machine learning algorithm to accept women. So the fact of the matter is, if we're building stuff, neural networks don't have the ability to forget. All you can do is sort of like slam in more and more and more data that kind of covers whatever inequities are at the fundament. And that's very, very dangerous, especially when we're exporting from the North to the South all of these new models of learning, because it's up to whoever is receiving these algorithms and these systems to figure out where the bias is, as opposed to sort of like solving it before it's exported. So I just wanted to kind of to show that.
Thanks, Caitlin.
Nicholas, I have just a few key points here, and I think again it goes back to what could the kick itself do. One, I think it's really important, and Patrick, I agree with you, it's important to focus on the opportunities, but I also think as investors with sort of that risk impact mind, hat on, we need to look at having a better understanding really amongst investors and amongst this community on what are the most sensitive use cases, and really defining what they are, and really focus on that set in particular. Then I think we need to go to the next set of sort of like, okay, maybe they're not sensitive use cases, but there's demonstrated practice of algorithm bias, like in the case of Amazon. I would actually put Amazon in the more. And the third is this idea of defining what stakeholder engagement and stakeholder input really look like in the digital world. And I think one key point that Shamira highlighted was that it needs to include everyone that is impacted by this. And I think it would be really interesting for the KIC to focus on how are companies themselves defining stakeholder engagement in this world, in this realm, and are there ways in which we can improve on stakeholder engagement to make sure that the most vulnerable voices have a seat at the table or are reflected in the assessment process. And in that case, I actually think there's a great opportunity for companies themselves to think about knowledge share and knowledge transfer to Global South, to ensure that they have the same level of technical standards and understanding and have the ability to innovate in this space. So I'll just stop there.
Thanks, Lauren. Patrick, maybe a minute.
Yes, thank you. So I think we fully agree, Kathleen and Laureen. Kathleen, you started here by saying we are in a moment of time where we might even address the basic discrimination that we have about between the global majority and the global minority. And myself, I think maybe AI can be used to solve some of our huge environmental challenges that we have. Of course, those of us here at this call, we are addressing the challenges, and so are many other companies and NGOs and investors, etc. What I'm saying is that the overall communication to everyone out there, students and business developers, etc. If you start only with the challenges, then people will not invent technology for good. They will be stuck with the challenges. So that's my message. But of course, at the same time, we need to address the challenges. Yes, I fully agree. And I gave some examples. Thanks.
Thanks, Patrick. I'm not sure whether we have any final comments from Jan. Sorry to put you on the spot in case you have any closing remarks following the discussion.
Thank you, Nicholas. No problem at all. Nothing in terms of any sort of overarching closing remarks, but I was in the middle of typing a chat message, actually, so I might as well articulate it. I think maybe it is important to double down on a point that I believe both Lauren and Caitlin made in the course of this discussion about conducting impact assessments, including those that incorporate a human rights focus. Because I think there's a very strong incentive for companies to defer to government regulation while developing new AI tools, and I think we see this very much with the development of generative AI. And then these tools are also oftentimes opened to redeployment, right? So just case in point. You already see numerous, countless adaptations of ChatGPT that is being used by multiple companies and multiple groups that are not even necessarily companies in ways that are even harder to control, right? So the base tool is already difficult and challenging, and now the myriad iterations of it add an even greater layer of complexity, right? So I think this, there is a lot of complexity here, and deferring, signing over responsibility to government regulation can become a very convenient shortcut, right? I think it's important to keep that in mind and to make sure that is not abused, right? It is not, it's not. There's no silver bullets, right? It's not as easy as saying governments should regulate this, and in the meantime, we will continue developing these tools with no checks and balances. That responsibility has to be balanced much more so than it is today, without, again, shifting responsibility too much. So I think I'll pass it on back to you, Nicholas, to end with a couple of words and just say thank you, everyone, for coming again. This has been a great discussion.
Thanks, Jan, for those closing remarks. Very insightful discussion indeed. Need for universal frameworks that ensures inclusivity of all stakeholders across the globe. There needs to be education on ethics principles as shared by our lead discussants. Mass testing of AI ethics tools before they're introduced to the markets, and companies. How are companies defining stakeholder engagement? There needs to be knowledge sharing across the globe and to various stakeholders. So a massive thank you all to our lead discussants for joining this session today. I believe we've all learned from each other in this session, and we look forward to further engaging on this topic of AI ethics which definitely requires a multi-stakeholder collaboration to address some of the challenges that have been discussed in this session. So thank you so much, and do have yourself a lovely week ahead.
Thanks, Nicholas.